Professor Hook eventually left us in 1989, and I'm a generation younger than him. I haven't sailed as close to the bitter end as he had to do, nor have I yet had to think of having such an arduous conversation with a physician. But I do remember lying there and looking down at my naked torso, which was covered almost from throat to navel by a vivid red radiation rash. This was the product of a month-long bombardment with protons, which had burned away all of the cancer in my clavicular and paratracheal nodes, as well as the original tumour in the esophagus. This put me in a rare class of patients who could claim to have received the highly advanced expertise uniquely available at the stellar zip code of MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. To say the rash hurt would be pointless. The struggle is to convey the way that it hurt on the inside. I lay for days on end, trying in vain to postpone the moment when I would have to swallow. Every time I did swallow, a hellish tide of pain would flow up my throat, culminating in what felt like a mule kick in the small of my back. I wondered if things looked as red and inflamed within as they did without. And then I had an unprompted rogue thought. If I had been told about all this in advance, would I have opted for the treatment? There were several moments as I bucked and writhed and gasped and cursed when I seriously doubted it. It's probably a merciful thing that pain is impossible to describe from memory. It's also impossible to warn against. If my proton doctors had tried to tell me up front, they might perhaps have spoken of grave discomfort, or perhaps of a burning sensation. I only know that nothing at all could have readied or steadied me for this thing that seemed to scorn painkillers and to attack me in my core. I now seem to have run out of radiation options in those spots, 35 straight days being considered as much as anyone can take. And while this isn't in any way good news, it spares me from having to wonder if I would willingly endure the same course of treatment again. But mercifully, too, I now can't summon the memory of how I felt during those lacerating days and nights, and I've since had some intervals of relative robustness. So, as a rational actor taking the radiation together with the reaction and the recovery, I have to agree that if I had declined the first stage, thus avoiding the second and the third, I would already be dead, and this has no appeal. However, there is no escaping the fact that I am otherwise enormously weaker than I was then. How long ago it seems that I presented the proton team with champagne and then hopped almost nimbly into a taxi. During my next hospital stay in Washington, D.C., the institution gifted me with a vicious staph pneumonia and sent me home twice with it, that almost snuffed me out. The annihilating fatigue that came over me in consequence also contained the deadly threat of surrender to the inescapable. I would often find fatalism and resignation washing drearily over me as I failed to battle my general inanition. Only two things rescued me from betraying myself and letting go: a wife who would not hear of me talking in this boring and useless way, and various friends who also spoke freely. Oh, and the regular painkiller. How happily I measured off my day as I saw the injection being readied. It counted as a real event. With some analgesics, if you're lucky, you can actually feel the hit as it goes in, a sort of warming tingle with an idiotic bliss to it. To have come to this, like the sad goons who raid pharmacies for OxyContin. But it was an alleviation of boredom and a guilty pleasure, not many of those in Tumour Town, and not least, a relief from pain. In my English family, the role of national poet was not taken by Philip Larkin, but by John Betjeman, bard of suburbia and the middle class, and a much more mordant presence than the rather teddy-bearish figure he sometimes presented to the world. His poem, 5 O'Clock Shadow, shows him at his least furry. This is the time of day when we in the men's ward think, one more surge of the pain and I give up the fight, when he who struggles for breath can struggle less strongly. This is the time of day that is worse than night. I've come to know that feeling all right, the sensation and conviction that the pain will never go away and that the wait for the next fix is unjustly long. Then a sudden fit of breathlessness, followed by some pointless coughing, and then, if it's a lousy day, by more expectoration than I can handle. Pints of old saliva, occasionally mucus, and what the hell do I need heartburn for at this exact moment? It's not as if I've eaten anything. A tube delivers all my nourishment. All of this, and the childish resentment that goes with it, constitutes a weakening. So does the amazing weight loss that the tube seems unable to combat. I've now lost almost a third of my body mass since the cancer was diagnosed. It may not kill me, but the atrophy of muscle makes it harder to take even the simple exercises without which I'll become more enfeebled still. I am typing this, having just had an injection to try to reduce the pain in my arms, hands, and fingers. The chief side effect of this pain is numbness in the extremities, filling me with a not irrational fear that I shall lose the ability to write. Without that ability, I feel sure in advance my will to live would be hugely attenuated. I often grandly say that writing is not just my living and my livelihood, but my very life. And it's true. Almost like the threatened loss of my voice, which is currently being alleviated by some temporary injections into my vocal folds, I feel my personality and identity dissolving as I contemplate dead hands and the loss of the transmission belts that connect me to writing and thinking. These are progressive weaknesses that in a more normal life might have taken decades to catch up with me. But as with the normal life, one finds that every passing day represents more and more relentlessly subtracted from less and less. In other words, the process both ideates you and moves you nearer toward death. How could it be otherwise? Just as I was beginning to reflect along these lines, I came across an article on the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. We now know from dearly bought experience much more about this malady than we used to. Apparently, one of the symptoms by which it's made known is that a tough veteran will say, seeking to make light of his experience, that what didn't kill me made me stronger. This is one of the manifestations that denial takes. I'm attracted to the German etymology of the word stark, and its relative used by Nietzsche, starker, which means stronger. In Yiddish, to call someone a starker is to credit him with being a militant, a tough guy, a hard worker. So far, I've decided to take whatever my disease can throw at me and to stay combative, even while taking the measure of my inevitable decline. I repeat, this is no more than what a healthy person has to do in slower motion. It is our common fate. In either case, though, one can dispense with facile maxims that don't live up to their apparent billing. I may have made one exception to my emerging rule that Nietzsche was to be distrusted, or to my pretense to myself that I had resources that I may not have truly possessed. A good deal of cancer life has to do with the blood, of which cancer is indeed the particular malady. A sufferer will find himself giving quite a quantity of the fluid, either to facilitate the opening of a catheter or to help test the levels of blood sugar and other material. For years, I found it absurdly easy to undergo routine blood tests. I would walk in, sit down, endure a brief squeeze from a tourniquet until a usable vein became available or accessible, and then a single small stab would allow the filling of the relevant little tubes and syringes. Over time, however, this ceased to be one of the pleasurable highlights of the medicalized day. The phlebotomist would sit down, take my hand or wrist in his or her hand, and sigh. The welts of reddish and purple could already be seen, giving the arm a definite junky look. The veins themselves lay sunken in their beds, either hollow or crushed. Very occasionally they would cooperate with a junkie-based strategy that consisted of slowly smacking them with taut fingertips, but this seldom yielded a robust result. Large swellings would occur, usually just near the elbow or wrist joint, or anywhere they would do the least good. In addition, one had to stop pretending that the business was effectively painless. No more the jaunty talk of one little pinch. It doesn't actually hurt that much to have a probing needle inserted for a second time. No, what hurts is having it moved to and fro, in the hope that it can properly penetrate the vein and release the needful fluid. And the more this is done, the more it hurts. This illustrates the whole business in microcosm, the battle against cancer reduced to a struggle to get a few drops of gore out of a large, warm mammal that cannot provide them. Please believe me when I say that one quickly comes to sympathize with the technicians. They're proud of their work and don't enjoy imposing discomfort. Indeed, they will regularly and with relief give place to another volunteer or submit to another's expertise. But the job has to be done, and there is dismay when it can't be completed. I was recently scheduled for the insertion of a PICC line, by means of which a permanent blood catheter is inserted in the upper arm, so that the need for repeated temporary invasions can be obviated. The experts told me that this seldom took more than 10 minutes to complete, which had been my own experience on previous visits. It can't have been much less than 2 hours, until, having tried and failed with both arms, I was lying between 2 bed pads that were liberally laced with dried or clotting blood. The upset of the nurses was palpable, and we were further off from a solution. As this kind of thing became more common, I began to take on the role of morale booster. When the technician would offer to stop, I would urge her to go on and assure her that I sympathized. I would relate the number of attempts made on previous occasions in order to spur greater efforts. My self-image was that of the plucky English immigrant rising above the agony of a little needle stick. Whatever didn't kill me, I averred, would make me stronger. I think this began to pall on the day that I had asked to keep going through 11 sessions, and was secretly hoping for the chance to give up and go to sleep. Then suddenly the worried face of the expert cleared all at once as he exclaimed, "Well, 12 times is the charm," and the life-giving thread began to unspool in the syringe. From this time on, it seemed absurd to affect the idea that this bluffing on my part was making me stronger, or making other people perform more strongly or cheerfully either. Whatever view one takes of the outcome being affected by morale, it seems certain that the realm of illusion must be escaped before anything else.